All right. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, Laura. Welcome. Just in time. So welcome to our Career Insight series. And today we are focusing on social work, which is very near and dear to my heart as a social work bachelor degree holder, I guess you could call it. Although I went into higher education, it's definitely very near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited that we'll get to highlight the profession today. Really quickly, just want to introduce myself. My name is Panelists. I currently serve as the advisor and program coordinator at Beyond Barnard. Within that, I lead the Career Insight series. I do one-on-one individual advising, and I supervise our peer career advisors on campus. Without further ado, I am going to pass it over to our panelists because we have a lot of great experience on today, and I can't wait to hear from all of you. So I will pass it over to Elaine first. So Elaine, if you can introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do and how you got to your current position.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this here, Alice. I was very excited to see this, like you asking, because I mentioned to Vikki before everyone hopped on. I didn't hear about social work when I was at Barnard. That could have been my own personal experience. So obviously those who are here are really interested in it already, which is great, but I'm glad that you're making space for this here, Alice. So thank you. I'm Elaine Gottesman. I graduated in class of 2014. That was before all the construction. And I currently work, I'm a geriatric social worker is what I like to say, even though I'm still being in my career, but I intend to always work with older adults. And I currently work at York-Presbyterian Weill Cornell Hospital, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, off of York Avenue. And what I do there is I follow older adults when there's concerns for elder abuse. So I mean, I don't know if there's a time limit on this, but okay. Graduate, so I mentioned in college, I didn't know much about social work. My lens was about like business, and I want to be like some sort of leader and like make a lot of money and lead people. And I like, what? Hi, and so I had gone to explore management consulting and marketing boot camps. Out of college, I started working in a marketing agency doing ad buying, which is where you're using a lot of Excel and going to lots of events at night and essentially putting ads into magazines on behalf of clients who are paying for the ads, and you're facilitating that. I really didn't like that. I tried 2 different agencies. It was really not great for me. And I think I told you this over in email, but I'm not sure. I was fired from my first job, and I've been waiting for so long to be in a place where I could like comfortably say that. It was very embarrassing at the time, but yes, I really didn't like that work, and it was not meant for me. And so I was talking to my, it was then boyfriend, current husband, and I said, what am I going to do with my life? Like everyone needs just somebody to like point something to them. So he was the person. He said, you like older adults, you like to talk to them, why not make a job out of it? I currently, I know geriatric care managers. These are people who help manage different things for older adults. Why don't you look into that more, see if you can pursue that? So that turned into going into social work. And my vision going in has always been helping vulnerable older adults. And so that has led me through different careers, including doing private therapy, currently working in a hospital, and we can talk more, but that's how I got to here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I find that, having a career switch is often something that we talk about a lot at Beyond Barnard, right? That we have this trajectory and we're so sure we're going to go somewhere, and then life just kind of tosses a lot of curveballs, and we find that we're different people. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I find geriatric social work, all aspects of social work, to be hard but such rewarding work, especially with geriatric care. I have such a respect for it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Vikki, your turn. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Sure. So I majored in economics at Barnard, minored in environmental science, and took a lot of education courses. The registrar, when she finally met me, she's like, "Oh, you're the girl that takes E classes." I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." And so I mean, honestly, when I was 17 and I applied to Barnard, I thought I'd be an immigration lawyer. And then in college, I realized I hate writing. And so why would I sign up for that? And so it had me questioning a little bit, but I loved math. I loved math a lot. So that's how I ended up majoring in economics, because my mentor was like, take an econ course, because she had majored in economics. That's my cat. She had majored in economics, so she's like, take a course for me, just for me. And I loved it. And I loved the professor. And so I just took every class he offered. And that's how I majored in economics. And that's kind of honestly the same way I minored in environmental science. Like I just loved the professor and just followed him everywhere. And then when I graduated, I thought I wanted to be a math teacher, because I'm really good at explaining it to people and they get it. And I love seeing that light bulb go off in their head. But honestly, the summer before my senior year, I volunteered with Let's Get Ready. And I think there still is a partnership with Barnard, but my friend was running one of them down in downtown Brooklyn. And he was like, hey, I'm running this like site, come volunteer for the summer. And I was like, sure, what else am I gonna do? Because I think I was just babysitting that summer. And I fell in love with providing college advisement, because that was like my role there. And then the following year, I did an internship in it for a few years, because it continued after college. And then eventually, I did a lot of service. So like, I really like volunteering. So I did a lot of AmeriCorps programs and things like that. And by 3 years out of undergrad, I was like, I want to be a college advisor. And so that's what I've been doing. I've done it in different places. Now I'm a college access manager. I've thought of transitioning to the college side. I don't think I'm quite there yet. I still like the high schoolers. But honestly, it was my experience at Barnard that led me here, because like, I didn't have a great time navigating it. And as awesome as the HEOP office was, I needed more support. And so when I went out into the world and became a college advisor, I'm like, okay, let me pass on all the knowledge I have gathered from my 4 years at Barnard onto other students who are also first gen and low income and first in their family to attend and all this stuff. And so like a lot of the work I do is with that specific population and getting them prepared to attend college and have a good time, because I want them to enjoy college, because I didn't have the best time. And so, yeah, and how did I get in my specific role? I actually did this panel a year ago and I was unemployed. And the last job I had before my current role was because someone who graduated from Barnard that I met at a brunch through like a friend had recommended me for a job at the door. And so then I was at the door for 2.5 years. And then when I left the door, I had made enough connections through like conferences and workshops and all this stuff that the minute I posted I was unemployed, maybe like a month later, somebody was like, hey, are you really unemployed? Because I have a job for you. And so that's how I got hired at Energy Settlement. And I love what I do. And I feel like that was a little long-winded, but I think it explains a lot.
Not long-winded at all. Priscilla mentioned that they were at that panel last year, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So kind of like same work, but kind of opposite sides of the spectrum almost. And coming from someone, you know, that you switch, coming from an econ major, you know, and making that shift. I think a lot of econ or maybe like majors that are heavy, you know, in STEM, feel like they can't make that switch, or it's like impossible. So it's very much possible for all you students watching and here in the panel, if you want to go that route. So thank you so much, Vikki. Excited to hear more from you. And last but not least, Elia, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I love talking about social work, so I'm very excited to be on the panel. And I love talking to people who are interested in going into social work. So it's great to be here. So I graduated from Barnard in 2010, and I actually went to Barnard planning on being a psychology major, which I did. And my plan after Barnard was to get my PhD in psychology. And I had a wonderful mentor at the time. I think the TA of the social psychology class, and she was like, hey, you know, you should really get some experience before you apply to PhD programs. You have to also take the GREs and all that stuff. So I recommend, you know, getting some experience with a specific population, and that'll make you a better candidate when you apply to doctorate programs. So I said, okay. And I applied to like every single research job that was posted in New York State, and I didn't get any of them. And I was really sad and a little bit frustrated. And there was an intern posting for an organization called the Correctional Association of New York, and they said that they did work with people, they essentially monitored state prison conditions. And I was like, okay, criminal justice, people who are incarcerated, that's a population. I'm just going to intern. I was like babysitting and working as a receptionist at the time. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to intern, and that's going to give me some experience. And then I can decide what I want to do from there. And I loved it. I absolutely loved working at the organization. I loved going into jails and prisons and talking to people and hearing their experiences. And I really felt like I had found my path and what I wanted to do. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I can go to law school and I can get a law degree and I can represent people as a public defender, or I can go to social work school and actually talk to people. And I also realized at some point that getting a doctorate would really mean just like doing research, and I really wanted to kind of have that direct experience and talk to people. And I also realized that as an attorney, I would be very focused on kind of representing people and not get that opportunity to kind of work directly and hear people's stories and all of that. So and through the Correctional Association, I started meeting other people in the criminal justice field and legal field, and I realized that social workers were really in that field as well and in that work. So I decided to go to social work school. And I was very focused all throughout my MSW on working, you know, in the criminal justice system and legal settings. And so I was able to continue doing that while I was in social work school in my internship. And then when I graduated, I got a job at a public defender's office in Brooklyn, working with young people ages 14 to 21 charged with felonies. Very familiar with The Door, which is an awesome organization. And from there, I just kind of kept building and networking. The criminal justice or defense-based social work is a very small world in New York City. And so you start to learn and get to know what other people are doing and other organizations and so forth. And after 4 years at Brooklyn Defender Services, I was actually hired by another public defender office to build their criminal justice or their social work practice. And that was a very exciting opportunity to do that and really build a social work program in a legal setting, which I did. And now I'm currently the director of social work at Appellate Advocates, which is also a public defender office. And I work really closely with attorneys on specialized legal cases, so individuals who have pending immigration matters, victims of domestic violence and sex trafficking. And I work with attorneys and I do a lot of writing, a lot of mitigation reports. So again, presenting people's stories, figuring out, talking to them about what's going on and how we can best support them moving through their legal case. And I do a lot of counseling as well. So, and I'm also a supervisor, so I supervise social work interns who are getting their MSW in their field practice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elia. Thank you for sharing that your experience is so interesting. And I think as I was hearing and listening to your stories and your career trajectories, I think that one of the greatest things about a degree in social work is that you can do that kind of change work in so many different areas, right? Like you have macro level social work, micro level, more one-on-one, and working in law, policy. And I just think that the degree can be used in so many different ways. And as you can tell, you know, I just love, like, I'm a social worker at heart in higher education. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we are going to move on to our next question for our panelists. So I'd like to hear from you all. What are some key skills or competencies that are essential to the field of social work, would you say? And anyone can start us off.
All right.
You go, Elia.
Go.
Please.
I feel like I was just talking, so why don't you go?
No, you go. I was first last time.
So, I think that a key skill for social work, right, is really being interested in this work. I think that it is hard work, and it takes a lot out of you. I think probably no matter what field you're in, and no matter like if you're doing macro or micro or where you're working, right? I think it takes a lot out of you. So I think definitely an interest in working with people and holding space for people. Empathy is like a huge part of this work, right? And also be like use of self, right? I was doing a training the other day, and the facilitator was talking about how we are our biggest tool, right, in this work. And so having a good sense of like who you are, what you're interested in, and knowing that you're going to be able to like hold space for people in many different aspects.
I mean, I'll be honest, like being bilingual has been really useful for it. There's a lot of people who need social workers who don't speak English. And like any other language you can acquire, not just Spanish, but like any other language you can acquire right now is really useful. I just saw an email calling for like social workers who speak Ukrainian and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, cool. So like, let's find some people. So I do think we struggle sometimes to find people. So like the best thing is to have a translator in between, because like you really can't communicate sometimes. Like you really do need someone else's help. So that's like the first skill I would say for sure off the bat that has been the most useful to me. Understanding like different cultures and culture dynamics and all that stuff. And I would argue like truly understanding the systems of oppression and how they show up in like our like clients' lives. Even if they don't know the exact words for it. Like I had a student recently who like was really struggling with the way her family was treating her and her brother differently. And she's like, what is going on? Like, why do I have to come straight home from school and he can do whatever he wants? And so I sat her down and I like explained what sexism was and like, this is what's going on in your family. And like, she knew something was up, but didn't have the vocabulary. And like, when I gave her the vocabulary, it like really empowered her to like, oh, this is a real thing. I'm not imagining it. Like, this isn't something that I'm making up. And I'm like, no, this is a very real thing that happens to girls, unfortunately. And so I think being able to not only just know the systems of oppression, but also to be able to disseminate that information in a way that is understandable to people who like might sometimes find the words themselves icky, because I find girls who are like, I'm not a feminist, and I'm like, okay, cool, but here we are talking about girl power and things like that. And so I definitely think there's stigma around some stuff still, even though we think like the younger generations are more aware, more better. But like being able to like break down like big words into like simple terms that they can understand, and honestly like using their lived experiences as a guide. Like they know their life the best, and so like you can kind of start explaining what is going on in there to them, and like yeah, and so those are I think some of the best skills I use on the regular.
That's great. In addition to what everyone has said, just a little bit. So one of the things that you said, Vikki, was like understanding systems of oppression and how it shows up in clients' lives. I also think it's helpful just in general for coworkers' lives. I think what we do a lot in our work in general, again, is Elia said, was holding space for people. I think like kind of tying that together too is not a humility factor, meaning knowing what your place is within the context of oppression and things in general, and seeing a big picture and not taking things personally is a big thing. I think what I mean is being able to know where, I think when you get to zoom out and have that patience, have that curiosity to zoom out and see what is this interaction really about. It's not about me, it's about all the stuff that's been thrown that person's that way, and that their family and their generations, and what is the company doing to them, and what impacts that. Like being able to just take a step back and be curious, I think, is a big thing. And not everyone has patience for that. Not everyone, and I think a lot of social workers, it's helpful to lean in. They need to lean in when other people are leaning out. When people, it's so much easier just to do things the way they've always, you've been taught how they're done. And I think as a social worker, you have to be able to challenge the way you're thinking of things, and see how other people see things. And that's just the best way to be able to serve others. I think I love what Elia said about what you understood about how like lawyers do X, or Vikki too, lawyers do X. I don't want to be a lawyer. Like it was great that you defined what social workers could do, which is oftentimes the people skills. I think the three of us are very people oriented, and I mean people in people oriented roles. I also want to share that social workers do research, and they are behind the scenes, and they also do policy work. That's kind of what I think both of you are doing that a little bit too. Just changing systems in addition to like this concept of macro, like looking at the way a system runs, in addition just helping individuals. You can do both in that role, in one social work role, which is really awesome. And then I think that, yeah, there's more, but we'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, there's just a ton. I'm sure we could go on. And I think all of you had touched on this point, I think overall as a theme, but those people skills and having patience, but also what Elaine had mentioned about leaning in. And I think that social work is always evolving. It's always changing. I think there is a level of continuous education within it, because as like society changes, our work has to change as well. So I'm so glad that you had mentioned that. Thank you so much, Elaine. So next question that I have for our panelists is, what role, and actually Vikki kind of touched on this a little bit, what role has networking played in your career development, if any? And anyone can start.
And yeah, I can talk about it since I brought it up before. So my friend that pulled me into Let's Get Ready was my friend Steven. And then the internship I got at Latinos in College was literally through Facebook. Like I liked their page and I kept commenting, and then they were like, hey, be an intern. And then the next internship I had with Maria Hinojosa was through one of my classmates. Well, she was a year younger than me at Barnard. So Nancy, she called me. She's like, you're still unemployed, want to go to Guatemala for 8 weeks? And I was like, sure. Like, don't tell me twice. And then after that, honestly, I didn't get connected to things for a while until in 2014, I showed up at Barnard for help at the career development office. And I think they were kind of just starting the alum stuff. And I was like, hey, I don't know what I want to do and I need some help. And I met with Christina and she was really helpful. And we came to the conclusion that I wanted to be a college advisor. And she's like, I just got an email from the previous dean, Dean Denberg, about a job in this field. And so she forwarded it to me. And that was the first job I got in this field. And then when I came back, the job at the door, I got through somebody from Barnard. And then this current job, I got through somebody that I met at an anti-racism workshop. And so like, honestly, all the connections you make definitely like, I definitely didn't expect any of this to happen at all. I didn't even know that person, like the last person who got me this job, like I didn't know that she remembered me from the anti-racist workshop. I felt like I was really quiet in there. And she's like, but the few times you spoke, you said some really great stuff. And that's why I want you on my team. And so like networking really can get you really far. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be Barnard, but Barnard has made a big chunk of it, like a big part of it. And these days, like I would honestly suggest, like, if you post maybe even in like a Barnard alum group or in a Seven Sisters group, someone's going to connect you to someone because they genuinely just want to help you. And like, I'm happy to also connect you to people as well. Like, that's kind of also one of the things I do is like, I'm a connector and I connect people to ask questions and things like that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Vikki. And I'll have other panelists kind of chime in as well if they have anything to add. But I think networking is a theme that, oh my goodness, we hammer home so much. If a student has met with us, we're like just networking, and it can seem like such a scary thing to start or to initiate. But I think, like Vikki had mentioned, like going on Facebook, having these one-on-one connections, talking with people it doesn't have to be this very like formal process. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to call attention to Kenya. Kenya actually is one of our panelists. You're able to join us. So hi, Kenya. Thank you for joining. After this question, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. But any other thoughts on networking? Anything to add?
Sorry, I would also just add, you know, for like if you know that you're interested in an area of social work, right, whether that's criminal justice or working with young people or whatever, you know, in New York City, I have found that it's a small world, and so not only is networking really great, like I know myself and my colleagues at other criminal defense-based organizations, they're happy to talk to social workers who are interested in going into this field. So you can find us and email us and, you know, have an informational interview, and all of that is really helpful. But also like keeping in mind that it is a small world. So if you end up interning someplace or for the summer or get a job, right? Like whoever's supervising you is probably going to know another supervisor who's hiring at a different organization. So also keeping that in mind as you kind of move throughout your career, that, you know, people are going to be paying attention to the work you're doing and might reach out, you know, to find out how you did at a certain intern or an internship or a job or, you know, whatever it is as well. I found that, you know, as I've applied to different jobs, it's like, oh, I actually know the person who's interviewing me because, you know, we were at a training together on a specific topic or, you know, something like that. So, you know, networking also in terms of, you know, these people potentially be hiring you in the future or evaluating you or, you know, whatever it is as well.
Yeah, and I'll go and I'll let Kenya go after. I think it's always happening. Whoever's in this room right now or whoever's, you know, listening afterwards, if you reach out to us, like it's right now, I would call this networking in a sense, not like a, you know, it's just reaching the way you talk to your classmates, the way you talk to any colleague if you're working. I think that I would count that as part of networking. So keep, you know, just you in a good way, you showing up as you. I think something to keep in mind is not shutting the door on yourself before someone else can shut the door on you. So meaning just like reach out to a bunch of people and that's fine. Like, it's fine if you hear about it and you don't like it, that's fine. What I would say is if you do reach out to someone and you don't like the work they're doing or something, just pretend you do, pretend you're interested, especially do your research before calling someone if possible. Do a little Googling. I've once like interviewed somebody for my senior thesis and I didn't research him beforehand. That was like crazy now in retrospect that I would have done that. I don't know how, but like he taught me, he said, Elaine, hang up the phone right now, go research me and come back. Just in case you don't do that. And yeah, it can be intimidating, but everyone here was you at one point. Like, I still feel like I'm a mess and figuring things out. It seems like maybe Vikki and Elia have figured it out. And so, but you know, everyone has been in your place. So just keeping that in mind, we're all friends, we're all here to help each other. And we've all been helped before, so we're happy to give back.
Thank you all so much. And I'm going to pass it over to Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us. Super excited to have you here. So if you can quickly introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, everyone. Kenya George. My apologies for being late. Was in meetings. She, hers, and how did I? Oof, sorry. So I currently am a program director with an organization called Build NYC. So we teach high school students how to start and launch their own businesses. And so that's been a pretty interesting experience. I got my master's at Hunter School of Social Work. I don't know what year, I forgot, but got my MSW, and my specialization has been in community organizing, planning, and development. And so I think what has gotten me here today is just a lot of grace, and also just kind of a loving heart. I think I started off in just serving community at like 15, working at an after school program. And in that, just realizing just like how much I just not like my abilities for love and compassion, how it just fit very well in social work. And so just kind of growing into that space. So it's been interesting to have a social worker lens, and doing more organizational leadership, and organizational change, and coaching and training staff and all of that stuff. But I think just like a lot of grace, a lot of relationship building, and just kind of growing within my organizations. And yeah, so it's been an interesting experience thus far.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Kenya. Looking forward to hearing you chat more about that. So next question on our list. Obviously, we have to add a COVID-related question on here. So I'd like to hear from all of you about how the COVID-19 pandemic, that is still going on, affected your professional practice, if at all, which I imagine it probably has, and talk about some of the ways that it has specifically, and anyone can start.
For me, one, never wanting to work in an office, a traditional office again. So I think just being able to kind of really reimagine how care can be provided, how management can be still effective, how leadership can still be effective, and not necessarily reporting always to an office. So that for me has been very, very, very revolutionary. I think also just in terms of like what it means, like as a manager of teams, like how you manage virtually has been very, very interesting and different, right? I think in traditional workspaces, you can like easily turn around and say, hey, do you have this thing? But like thinking, I'm in a coffee shop, so if you hear the music in the background, that's why. And so I think one, thinking about how to like build and bridge teams together has really shifted my practice. How I manage and understand how teams are formulated, right? So this is like the other side of social work, which is like not necessarily like case management or clinical work, but and also just kind of like really reimagining how to like borders and barriers. Like sometimes I feel like with what's happened in nonprofit is that although coalitions have always existed, like this idea that you can literally reach across not only the aisles or organizations, but also like true like states, right? And to share best practices, to share and to build. I think that's been very interesting because although that's always been, that organizing energy has always been a part of social work and also just kind of like leadership, is just so prevalent, right? Because now we are understanding how we can use technology to really bridge these gaps in a way that I don't think that many of us weren't savvy enough to think about, right? And so it's been very interesting to see like how we share space in a virtual environment.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hit, I was at the door and everything went virtual. I was also in grad school and everything went virtual. My internship went virtual. And I really appreciated it at that time because I was burnt out. Working full time and doing grad school after work is a lot. And then also an internship on top of that was a lot. Like, honestly, I remember the week before we shut down, I told my internship supervisor, I was like, I don't know if I can make it till May. And she's like, you're so close, Vikki. And I was like, I need a break. And so I really appreciated quarantine. I know a lot of people were like, oh my God, I'm so sad. And I'm like, I need to sleep 12 hours because I'm doing a lot. And so I did appreciate those months that we were first on lockdown for that. But I think it also like shifted just how to do work and how like maybe I am a better worker later in the day, and maybe my schedule should be flexible, and maybe I can't be there by 9 a.m., right? Maybe I can't be there by 9 a.m. And all sorts of things that I figured out. Also, like just kind of how tiring commuting was, and how tiring like sometimes interfacing with my coworkers was, and how sometimes being virtual was a lot easier in many ways. For my current position, at Henry Street, we run a scholarship program. And so all of our students are super ambitious and doing a million things on top of their like school. And so shifting to virtual was honestly a blessing for them. Like we have had the most success since shifting to virtual, because now they can regularly attend our things, like they can come to all these things. And before it was kind of a struggle to make it all the way to the Lower East Side, because we're kind of located in an inconvenient spot from like trains and stuff. And so we actually are one of the few programs that's done really well since COVID. And that's really telling. And so like we've been advocating to like maintain a good chunk of our stuff virtual, because it just seems to work the best with our students. And I think that's something that our supervisors did not expect to come out of the pandemic at all. So it's kind of taught them to like reevaluate like how important having virtual programming for the students truly is.
Well, there are definitely so many like stresses, microaggressions, like challenges that people experience in the workplace that I know. I'm in an office right now, it's clear, that have a lot of my colleagues. It's been extremely game-changing and beneficial, and help their output and help them feel, helped a lot of us feel better and safer. For me personally, I do want to say, it sounds like, because I don't work with youth, I work with older adults, and so you can imagine if you work with older adults, there's sometimes there's cognitive impairment, there's vision impairment, hearing impairment. All those impairments can make it challenging to not be in person. Interesting fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, Adult Protective Services was the only or one of the only agencies that stayed in person doing home visits, whereas a lot of other agencies were remote. And it seems like for youth, it works really wonderfully. So it's important to I guess, be cognizant of the population we're working with, assuming you're not in like a managerial role like Kenya. And I think I guess, yeah, just thinking about the person, the population you're interested in working with, and what the best mode is. Yeah, so I find it very essential to be here in person, assessing and feeling that feeling of safety. A lot of people I work with feel safer in person versus over the phone. That's definitely not the case with a lot of other people populations.
Yeah, and I love what Elaine just highlighted, because so first of all, I started this job March 2020, so I actually started a new job like the week that everything shut down, which was a very interesting experience. But for, working with people who were incarcerated, and their family, it was an incredibly stressful and scary time for all my clients, right? They had no idea what was happening. The prison and jail system were like very unclear, late to provide, any type of safety protocols. There's like, you can't social distance in a prison, right? So it was a really scary time for a lot of my clients. And I spent a good couple months at the beginning of this job just, talking to people and doing my best to reassure them and families, and, providing as much support as I possibly could. And also like shifting my role and kind of providing support to attorneys who were all of a sudden like, self-care, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle a workload. Like I'm really stressed out, So it was I was providing support to colleagues and clients to kind of help people navigate this brand new situation that was very stressful for a lot of people. And also, I think as a lot of our clients, most of my clients are incarcerated, so it didn't shift my practice in terms of having contact with clients that way. But, we have a pretty robust reentry program, and clients who have been incarcerated for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like learning the technology that was needed to stay in touch during that time when everything was shut down was really difficult for a lot of people. Also, Appellate advocates had been, to my understanding, right, a place where clients could just like pop in and find someone to talk to or grab a Metro card or all of that, and to have the office shut down and not be able to kind of have access to their support systems during that time was really difficult for a lot of people as well. So it was a stressful time, but I do think that, you know, as Kenya pointed out, right, this reimagining, right, like how we work, and as Vikki said as well, like how we work best, when we work best, has also kind of been like a silver lining to all of us as well. Another thing that was interesting was also providing clinical supervision to the interns I worked with who were in graduate school during this time. So for almost the past 2 years, right, they have been working completely remotely. And, you know, I've had to have a lot of faith that they're like, you know, they can't like pop in and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, right? I have to really make sure that they're self-motivated and getting what they need to get done. And also, you know, I can't be there and observe like their conversations with clients. And it's been interesting to kind of teach clinical skills when I'm not able to kind of see an interaction with the client, but all kind of interesting learning experiences and navigating this in different ways.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All of you made excellent points. And I think that main theme that I was picking up is that with the pandemic, I think that there is a lot of talk about access, right? And how technology created such opportunities for access. And I think it really depends on, from a social worker lens, who are our clients? What population are we serving? And I think it's a toss up, right? Like there has been opportunities for access created there, but also in some aspects made the work a little bit more challenging. We just had to be more flexible in the way that we were doing things, for sure. We are at the 15-minute mark, so I want to let our students know that if you have questions, you can start populating them into the chat. We will have some space at the end. You are also free to unmute yourself. So just wanted to have you all thinking about your questions as I kind of go into our last two questions. So last two questions, but I would love to hear from our panelists. How have your visible and invisible identities played out in your career thus far? And anyone can kind of get us started here.
So I'm a person of color and I'm in social work. And I don't know if you guys know the origin of social work, but the origins of social work were rich white women to help the poor. And so sometimes it feels like a contradiction to be in this field as a person of color because of the original origins of this field. And it definitely comes up in people's biases towards me, for sure. I have experienced racism at work, unfortunately. I have experienced microaggressions at work. I mean, to be honest with you, like Elaine, you mentioned like all that stuff. And I was like, part of me was relieved to be working from home because I did not want to face people sometimes. And honestly, in transitioning jobs, like I had a very honest conversation with the person who hired me. And I was like, I am sometimes scared to transition jobs because I don't know the racism I'm going to experience at the next place. And so that's one. Two, I'm also like visibly fat. And people assume all sorts of things about fat people. They assume you're lazy. They assume that like you don't want to work, all this stuff. And when I worked at the door, I had a supervisor who used to say all sorts of awful things to me because of my body. And it was her biases that she didn't even know she fully had until like we had a meeting with HR because it got really serious. So that's another thing, as well as my invisible stuff. Like I have ADHD. And so I have to be like given directions in a specific way. And like, I prefer written emails of directions as opposed to verbal. Cause like, I'm going to remember it right now. And then I'm going to forget it probably 10 minutes from now. So I'm going to need you to write me an email so I can read what to do. And sometimes the ADHD, when I'm having like really bad functioning days, can trigger some depression, can trigger some other stuff, because depression is something I think everyone in my family has always struggled with. So it's something that I like deal with as well. And so sometimes that's like, I had a boss who had a problem with me going to therapy. And I was like, I'm legally allowed to do that. Like, and also in social work, like you should go to therapy. Like that's really important. Like you need to have someone to talk about your stuff. And so it was kind of wild to me of like how she tried to like weaponize it against me, which is why she's no longer my boss, thankfully. But I will say, at my current job, we have cultivated a space where all of us are people of color. The only people that are white are people in power, which is fine with us because like we don't really want to talk to donors. That's fine. Like we want to do on the ground work, and like we've cultivated a lot of like conversations and done a lot of like anti-racist workshops together and all sorts of things. And even though like we've done a lot of work, there's always work to be done and there's always conversations to be had. And so like even recently we had a conversation of like, why do people keep mispronouncing this one team member's name? So how do we like work on that? So there's always room to grow, but I think you can definitely find a good space that like you can communicate and like not feel oppressed. And so unfortunately, and also like other realities, like just being like non-binary and things like that, like a lot of people in these spaces tend to be women, but the further up you go, you sometimes see a lot of men, especially like as CEOs, as executive directors, things like that. And so there's a lot of sexism that comes out as well. But also I think in a weird way, Barnard kind of really like, I'm gonna say like blessed me with women who empower one another. And that doesn't happen in the workplace. Some of the worst bosses I have had have been women. And so it's really weird to like be in this beautiful bubble of like women supporting women. And it's like, it's amazing, it's fantastic. And then I went to workplaces and I'm like, why are these women so mean? And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to be said, but those are the first few things I thought of when you asked that question.
I think that's an excellent question. And so the first thing that came to mind, I think being a woman in leadership is always challenging, right? I think what's interesting is that the way in which one like shows up in spaces, like you're always mindful of and like how you're consumed. And I think one thing that I've always struggled with is just being like, one, a Black woman, one, a dark-skinned Black woman, and just kind of like how I'm consumed in that particular way. So actually recently in January, I was referred to as aggressive. And, you know, I had a moment of pause, right? Because one, I'm trying to reimagine what that means, right? Because, you know, like words is only as strong as the power that you give it, obviously, in addition to like all the macro, meso, all that other stuff too, right? But it was a moment of pause for me because I've had to learn how to like, you kind of have a moment in your professional career when you like either decide to not give a shit anymore, excuse my language, I don't know if I can curse, or you kind of like stick into this particular bubble of like how people need to experience you. And I think when I was called aggressive, I was literally given a mirror moment of like, okay, do I want to, how do I want to receive this as a part of my identity, right? And I decided to own it, right? And I think that when you're navigating certain spaces, right, there's always going to be, particularly as you're like moving up and making choices and sitting in your power of like your expertise and the work that you put in, to be able to sit at certain tables and say, no, I know, right? And like sitting in that expert, and also like obviously holding that with care, because there's a lot of care that you have to give that when you're at a particular seat. But I think it's just, there's always going to be moments where you're constantly fighting between how people are consuming you and all the many hats that you wear, and then also what you're what you're going to sit in with them, right? And deciding on that. So I've always had to kind of navigate that, because I've always in my professional career I have managed people, and so like that's always been interesting for me. And I think also just wanting to like really tap into what Vikki said, just around, like, I took a month off in February. And that was extremely hard for me, right? One, as a woman, right, it's just like, you don't do, like, you just work, right? It's just like you multitask and you figure it out. And I realized that I was going to break, like, not only break emotionally, but literally probably like lose my job cursing somebody out, right? And I think that knowing when to pause, like in social work, if you're managing people, you have to be intentional with your self-care. I don't think I can say that anymore. Like if you want to like serve people, if you want to make change, if you want to do policy work, if you want to be on the ground, if you want to be a gatekeeper with the people, then you have to be pouring into your cup. I have met so many people that came in super passionate, super compassionate, and then compassion fatigue is real, right? Because eventually you get tired of caring, because what you realize is that oppression is real, systems and structure is real, and that doesn't change. And it can make you feel like, why am I doing this? Right. And so you have to be able to pause, because those systems don't shift, right? We have to shift them. We have to fight with them all the time. And so I think that that's going to be like, and that part of my identity, like of like Kenya, the woman, Kenya being well, is also equally as important to everything else. So it's just always, if you want to do social work, you get your therapist, you get your Reiki healer, you get your whatever you need, right? Because you cannot work with people and who are hurting and who need and want and need support. Like, you can't do that with an empty cup. And a lot of people feel like they should be doing that, and that's righteous, but it's not. Literally killing yourself, and you're modeling something that we don't necessarily want the people that we're trying to serve to do. And I think that's extremely important. So I'm happy that you brought that to this space.
Thank you both so much for sharing so many things that popped up in my head, right? Like the colorism, size discrimination, more invisible identities, like mental health challenges, like ADHD. Like, I am neurodivergent. I have issues with that all the time. And it can be hard, especially within this field of work. So I can't, emphasize, Kenya's point enough with that. You can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care is critical in this field. Cannot stress that enough. So thank you both so much for sharing. Really, really appreciate that. And I know students will appreciate it as well. We are down to our last 5 minutes. So Priscilla did have a question in the chat. So if you all can share what a typical day looks like for each of you, because you all are in different positions. Your day-to-day might have similarities, but also some differences. So anyone can kind of share whatever we have time with, what your typical day looks like.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So most of my days are pretty much like back-to-back client meetings, counseling sessions with clients, meeting with attorneys to talk about cases I'm working on with them, meeting other members of appellate advocates, including reentry, to strategize, having interdisciplinary meetings with reentry staff and legal staff. And then every once in a while, I do prison visits probably about twice a month. So I'll head up to one of the state prison facilities and meet usually about 1 to 2 clients. Those are a couple hours, just kind of meet and greet, or doing extensive interviews for mitigation purposes or assessment purposes. So that's pretty much what a day looks like for me. It's usually very busy.
Anybody else?
Really quick, I would say there is no typical day. Like, there's like some days where I'm like training and coaching staff. Other days I'm like having strategic partnership meetings. Other days I'm having board meetings. Other days I'm trying to catch up on work because I have too many meetings during the day. I think at the core of it, like when you think about leadership and like in social work, it's like, and then also doing site visits and like knowing, like making sure that you're not that far from the ground, that you can make decisions, not based on only experience, but also like what's currently happening. So I would say like strategic partnership meetings, planning meetings, coaching and supervising and making sure people do their, like, they should be doing their job anyways, but like making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and that they have the support that they need. And then also trying to find that balance of like carving in time for my actual work and my job. And then, because every meeting has deliverables, right? So just finding that balance has been a thing for me, or flow for me rather.
Anybody else want to contribute, share? Okay, great. And we do have just one more question, kind of rapid fire, if we could answer this. Let's see, Laurel asked if someone could discuss the importance or differences between an MSW and a PsyD, if someone has experience. I think Elia might be able to speak on that a little bit, but also this can be, you know, I'll let the panelists answer this.
Yeah, I honestly don't have a good answer to that. And whatever answer I have is probably very outdated because I looked into this a very long time ago. So sorry, I can't be helpful.
I think a PsyD, just longer schooling, and definitely they can do like a certain type of testing, the testing for certain, you know, like extra time or something, versus social workers, they don't. Social workers look at like the world around. I don't know how much PsyDs are trained to look at the context of oppression and what are people, maybe today they are, but we're looking at people within their environments and not only doing therapy, but also ideally giving them holding their hand as they make their move, and doing like more like a case management type of work where you're getting in the weeds of someone's, you know, helping them with applications. I don't know if PsyDs would do that nitty-gritty piece, but we're looking at the whole of a person and the systems they're in.
Yeah, I know people who've gotten MSWs and then pursued a PsyD afterward. For whatever reason, I do think an MSW provides you a social justice background, depending on the program you attend. I went to Hunter, but it provides you a social justice background that I think is very necessary, that a PsyD probably will not. And like, as you'll learn as you get out here, there's hierarchies within mental health. And one of them is doctors think they know better or know best. And that's not necessarily the truth. And so that's probably what you sometimes will probably see in like your work experience too. And by doctors, I mean like medical doctors, as opposed to like PsyDs, which I think are different. But yeah, because people like to come out of their scope of practice all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing. I know that was my only advice for that student is reach out to both, you know, people who have pursued an MSW and completed it, and also a person who have pursued a doctorate in psychology. That would be my best. Thank you so much, Kenya.
Thank you all. Be well.
We are over time, so thank you, Kenya, for joining us.
My pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. I see our alum have shared their emails in the chat. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone afterwards, so I can share that information to students. But thank you again to our panelists. You all have been so amazing. We really appreciate your time here today, and I know students appreciate it as well. Other than that, take care, be well, and enjoy the rest of your day. It was nice talking to you all. Bye.